Hello and welcome to the channel both feared and revered by man and beast, the heliosblog. Today, Jordan Peterson talks about how Meghan Markle grates on him. This should be interesting.
The reason she's alone is because she's difficult.
Women are not accepting the bare minimum.
Women fuck men they respect.
All the women who say things like, I'm strong, independent, I don't need no man, like, y'all impress me.
Women just gaslight each other and say what they want to hear.
Today by Jonathan Haidt. He didn't write the paper. It will be published. It's published in a journal called Personality and Individual Differences, and it's an examination of the personality traits associated with, let's say, excessive and self-promoting internet usage.
So, narcissistic people on the internet?
And if you don't mind, I'd like to read you a couple of the descriptions of what the people found, because it's so absolutely spot on and relevant. I don't think we are descending into tribalism. I think what's happening is that the virtualization of the world is enabling people who behave in a particular antisocial way, in a self-grandizing and self-promoting antisocial way. And I'll just read you the description.
Ah, I see. It's bringing out the people out of the woodwork that normally would be self-serving like this, but it's amplifying it. It's enabling them to be kind of worse than they would be in a pre-social media world. I think I understand the idea.
Descriptions that are taken directly from this paper. So it was an actual study of online behavior. Women characterized by high self-centered antagonism, neurotic narcissism, Machiavellian views, Machiavellian tactics, so that's manipulativeness, meanness, disinhibition, physical sadism, and indirect sadism, used Instagram for a longer time and more frequently than did men.
Interesting. So you're saying that girls that show basically cluster B personality disorders are more likely to use social media. Interesting.
In women, verbal sadism and emotionality was associated with longer, while honesty, humility, and conscientiousness was with a shorter Facebook usage time.
I see. So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is a really big green flag you could get from a girl is her telling you that she doesn't use social media. That's what I'm reading here. That's what I'm hearing here.
Furthermore, women high in agentic extroversion, so that's manipulative self-promotion, and indirect sadism used Facebook for a longer time and more frequently than men. And so I've thought for a while that one of the things that's happening to us as we virtualize the world is that we're enabling the small percentage of people, it's usually about 3% in general populations, who use manipulation and reputation savaging and denigration and self-promotion, so the genuinely psychopathic types, to dominate the social conversation and to spew their poisonous and manipulative venom into the public domain.
Ah, I understand. So it's like a slow poison. It's a corruption that spreads as a result of it. That's a very interesting idea.
Not only with no fear of being stopped and no inhibition, which is almost all applied socially, but also while being monetized and promoted by the people who run the social media channels. And every society forever has had to contend with a small percentage of people who will utilize all the benefits of society only for themselves. They had to contend with the fact that those people, if not brought under control, can demolish the structure of the entire society. And I think the polarization that we're feeling is a consequence of their untrammeled expression
Right, it's effectively it's corruption.
Online, Instagram, Facebook, and in online comment forums like Twitter.
But that stuff you read out just said seemed to be gender specific to women. Presumably it also applies in other ways to men as well on social media.
Oh yeah, well I think the reason that it applied in this study in women.
Oh, by the way, it's very interesting that Piers would reply to this with, "Oh, you're only talking about women? How about men?" Well, we're not talking about men right now. We're talking about women.
women is because Instagram is very heavy image use. It involves heavy use of images, and there are reasons to assume that because of that, it attracts women who are directed towards short-term impulsive mating strategies, and that's another sign of impulsive, antisocial, and psychopathic behavior. I think you'd see the same thing in men. In fact, I've been talking to psychologists, great psychologists, to make sure that I'm on the right track here about those who post repeatedly, say, in online forums, especially in relationship to comments, and you certainly see that same pattern of sadism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism characterizing the men who are also incentivized to use what used to be classic female antisocial strategies to advance themselves in the reputational hierarchy.
But the bottom line is...
Exploiters, fundamentally.
Right, but the bottom line is that there is a small percentage of people generating a vast amount of noise. What impact is that happening on society, do you think?
Well, I think it skews our perceptions of what normal people are like. We assume that what we're getting, you know, when you sample the world, when you're walking through it, you make the assumption that you're getting an unbiased representation of the things going on around you. And when you're on an online platform and, say, reading comments, you also have the assumption that what you're seeing is something like a sample of public opinion. But it's not. You know, because if 10 strangers came up to you randomly in the street, then you'd have a bit of a sample of what people randomly think. But behavior online isn't random, and the people who post aren't precisely normal. And I have been talking with Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge about this, and I think they might know more about it than anybody else in the world. And it's pretty clear that the people who are dominating, say, online comment sections, and I would especially say this is true of the people who post anonymously, and there's other markers for this sort of behavior as well, they dominate the political discourse. And what's happening in some sense is that we have a new form of pollution that's also corporate sponsored, and it's pollution of the domain of public discourse. And the pollution occurs because the social...
Right, I actually do believe this. I believe that the truth is being obfuscated by such pollution.
Social media companies are either enabling or failing to control, you know, those known in the popular parlance as trolls, but they're not just comical trolls, you know, using derision in some cute way and having their say in the free speech domain. They're really poisonous individuals, and they're poisoning the entire domain of discourse.
So what can Elon Musk do? What can Elon Musk do about it, do you think? If you were advising him on this, I mean, ironically, at the moment, you're not on Twitter. A, do you want to come back now that Musk is in charge? Do you think you should be restored? Do you want to be back on Twitter? And secondly, what would you advise him to do
This guy's playing with his pen and it's really annoying me. But anyway, you can hear it on the mic.
About this issue of the trolls and so on?
Well, the first thing I would advise, and I'm going to be advising the political people I'll be talking to over the next few weeks of precisely this, and I have talked it over with Twenge and Haidt to make sure that I'm not, like I said, off on a personal tangent. I would say there's no excuse for including the anonymous posters with the real human beings. And I think that social media platforms who have a certain reach, maybe it's 1 million subscribers, and I don't really know what figure is appropriate, should be required to implement know your customer laws, and then that the people who are posting who are genuine, verified human beings willing to abide by their words with their personal reputation should be put in one comment section, and then the online, anonymous, cowardly, narcissistic, pathological troll demons who are polluting the public discourse should be put in a different comment section. And if you want to go to hell and visit the troll demons and see what they have to spew, you can, but otherwise you can be among the normal human beings engaged in normal civil human discourse. Right. And that would separate the bloody psychopaths from the bulk of decent, normal people. And, you know, 97% of people aren't psychopathic. Yeah. And so we are talking about a small minority here, but they have the upper hand. See, there's a percentage of people who...
I had a psychopath test done on me, actually, a lengthy questionnaire, and they concluded I was a good psychopath.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
And what do they mean by that exactly? Do you know?
Apparently, I wasn't like the malevolent version. It was slightly lost on me, the nuance.
Okay,
but...
well...
What that means is he's a greatly disagreeable individual, but he's not necessarily evil.
Okay, look. It's often the case that people in the industry that you're in, and this would be true for politics and journalism as well, anything with a public face, are more likely to be extroverted and also more likely to be somewhat disagreeable. And those personality traits can tilt you towards, what would you say, a style of callous exploitation. But there are other personality factors that mediate against that, like conscientiousness. And so people who are hardworking and reliable, for example, aren't parasitic in the same way that a classic psychopath would be. And so it's complicated, and it isn't the case that extroversion and even a certain degree of disagreeableness in and of themselves are dangerous, but they lead, like everybody's led to temptation in the direction that's in accordance with their temperament, and the fact that you are a public-facing person and that you like that would tilt you in one direction of potential temptation, but that's not necessarily diagnostic. Now, it is a problem because it probably is the case that politics and journalism and entertainment attract a disproportionate number of Machiavellians and psychopaths because of the status that goes along with those enterprises.
Yeah.
But it's not diagnostic. It doesn't mean that if you're in that industry, and you know, you've had a
It means you're more likely to be one, but it doesn't mean that you are one.
long career, and that's also another marker for failure or for lack of psychopathy, because in the normal world, psychopaths exploit, and they get a reputation for doing so quite quickly, and then people avoid them and stop working with them, and so it doesn't work over the medium to long run as a general rule.
Yeah, I get it. Last time we spoke at length, you said afterwards we forgot to get round to Donald Trump, and you were quite keen to talk about Donald Trump. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I do want to talk about Trump, because the big question right now in America is Trump done?
I don't really care for this, so I'll skip this.
And which she seems to perennially play the victim, the female victim of all outrages. And your name got dragged into this. Let's take a listen to what she said.
Raise your hand if you've ever been called crazy.
Ah, here we go.
Or hysterical. Or what about nuts, insane?
She has a very nice voice, but again, like the bad can come with the good. Let's put it that way.
Out of your mind, completely irrational.
I don't think that men can control crazy women.
The use of these labels has been drilled into us from movies and TV.
Yeah, except in most women's case, it isn't true. But in your case, I'm afraid it might be, it might be.
From friends and family, and even from random strangers. And the fact is, no one wants this label.
What did you make of that, Jordan, to be suddenly appearing on Meghan Markle's podcast as a villain?
The first
who was
thing I make
calling
of
women crazy
is that the first thing I make of it is that her voice drips with the same falsehood that the voice of Kamala Harris drips with.
Indeed. Great job. Great comparison.
It's this sanctimonious,
right.
Faux compassionate, talking down to her audience and trying to be sure that we're all really on the same compassionate page here, and we're all being victimized.
You know who this reminds me of? To all you Harry Potter fans out there, it's like Dolores Umbridge.
By terrible forces that are arrayed against us, and none of that's really fair. And it just grates on me, and I do believe you played a bit of a clip from me when I was talking to Paglia, Camille Paglia, the literary critic, and I do believe that it is the case that it's very difficult to control female antisocial behavior, often of the type that's been pilloried as hysterical. And I think that there is no shortage of clinical evidence to support precisely that claim. It's very difficult for women to control female antisocial behavior, and females who are antisocial, that feminine pattern is reputation savaging under the guise of compassionate care. And it's
reputation savaging under the guise of compassionate care. So it's exclusion from the group, but protecting your own reputation by pretending that you're actually caring for the person.
It's extraordinarily destructive. And so I stand by my words.
Absolutely.
And I do think it scales online, because you can use an anonymous reputation savaging to unbelievably great effect online with absolutely no punishment for your sins, so to speak. And that is certainly one of the things that's contributing to so-called cancel culture. And there's no shortage of that coming from the female side. Now, men can engage in exactly the same strategies, and they do so online, and that's enabled. But it's definitely, see, with men, and I've said this before, and I do believe this to be the case, the ever-present threat of the potential for physical violence.
Right. That's what keeps men from running their mouth, as it were, from saying whatever they want to say to other men. That's what keeps men polite towards each other, right? But women have no such fear.
Keeps men from doing that to each other most of the time in person. And that all disappears online, and that means that those who are prone to do such things, to use corrosive and denigrating derision, for example, and reputation savaging, can have a free hand at it, and that includes no shortage of women, and women are often, very, very often, the targets of that behavior from their own fellows, so to speak.
We've talked about Trump and Meghan Markle. I wanted to just ask you again about Elon Musk, about what you thought of him as a character. He seems to me a fascinating individual. You know, whether he's slightly on the spectrum or I'm not sure what his makeup is psychologically, but he's certainly a creative genius, a whirlwind, a life force who's done remarkable things. What do you make of him?
Well, I know people who know him very well and have worked with him very closely, and these are very solid people, extremely competent and extremely creative, and they're admirers of Musk. I talked with my brother-in-law, Jim Keller, who's one of the world's great chip engineers, and he worked very closely with Musk for years, and he believes that he's in many ways exactly what you'd think he was. He's a genius, but he's also like a visionary genius, but he's also someone who's very, very good at implementing, very good at running companies, as you can tell, because he has a multitude of impossible successful companies.
Yes.
And so he goes into a company and he cleans house and puts things in order and makes things work efficiently. And maybe he can do that with Twitter. I hope he can, because Musk is doing all sorts of things that appear to be useful and difficult, and it would be a catastrophe to see him derailed in his efforts. And I think he's bitten off a lot to chew with Twitter.
Jordan? Would you like to be back on Twitter?
You know, I dipped into Twitter this morning when I was looking at some of the research that I just shared with you, and it instantly struck me the same way it struck me the last time I was on Twitter. It's such a den of pathology that using it, I think, is psychologically damaging. And if it's possible...
Arguably, that's the case also for online, like, life in general. You need to be very careful how you're using social media. Otherwise, you'll destroy yourself. You'll destroy your self-esteem and so
on. Tonight's talk, this is the most popular talk we've ever done.
We're going to... We'll see what Jordan has to say on his own book in a second.
Get the trolls, and they're not trolls, they're psychopathic, Machiavellian, sadistic narcissists under control, then it's possible that the platform might be useful. I like to share information on it. I like to follow people to see what they were up to, a lot of the people that I've met over the years, but man, it's a snake pit.
It is a snake pit. It
isn't obvious to me that we know what to do about it.
Before I let you go, Jordan, you're wearing a poppy, I'm wearing a poppy. We're about to have a debate after the break about whether people should be compelled to wear poppies. And I guess this goes to the wider thing about general displays of, I guess, signaling your virtue in any way that you choose. Should anyone be compelled to, whatever the cause, whether it's a black square on Instagram when George Floyd died or a pop?
I think people should not be compelled to do these things, but, you know, whatever.
Right, and it's... Right, and so
So hierarchies have been around for 1/3 of a billion years, and we have a neurochemical system that modulates our understanding of those hierarchies. And then also, and this is the interesting thing too, and this is why people's reputations are so important to them, there's lots of reasons, but this is one of them, is that where this counter that you share with lobsters rates you in terms of your hierarchical position determines the ratio of negative emotion to positive emotion that you feel. And that's also an absolutely mind-boggling idea for two reasons. One is it tells you why it's so hard on people to be put down. Because it doesn't just upset them in the moment, it changes the way their entire system responds to the world so that they now experience more positive emotion and less negative emotion. So that's really rough. And then there's a corollary to that too, which is like, there's a very tight relationship between your belief system and your dominance hierarchy position. It's complicated, but it's worth going through. Like, let's say that, so I have a certain amount of status as a professor, and I have the, let's call it what would you say? I've been granted the entitlement to a certain position in a social hierarchy. Now, the question is, why do I have a valid claim to that position? And the answer, hypothetically, is because I know enough so that my claim to the position is valid. So then if you stand up in the audience and challenge my beliefs and show that I'm wrong, you might say, well, I get upset because I'm wrong. But the more accurate reason that I get upset is because you're indicating to the crowd that my position in the hierarchy of authority is invalid.
Right. That's why it's so scary to speak in front of a group of people, effectively. That's why many people are scared of public speaking, for this reason.
And by doing that, you lower me in the hierarchy and you mess around with the neurochemical systems that are regulating my emotions. And so if you're interested, at least in part, in why people are so prone to defend themselves and their beliefs in the service of their position, then that's why. And so that's a great example of how you can learn these unbelievable things by stumbling across a rather obscure biological fact. It just, what would you say? It's like a series of dominoes. And that's also why biological facts are so useful. It's like, we don't have to argue about whether or not social hierarchies, as I said, or hierarchies are social constructs. A given hierarchy is influenced in its structure by sociocultural conditioning, let's say, but the fact of the hierarchy, so like the part of your brain that detects and regulates your response to hierarchies is older than the part of your brain that recognizes trees. Like, it's old. It's really, really fundamental.
Very interesting. But effectively, it's what? Knowing where you stand for reproduction's sake, right?
So, and almost all social animals organize themselves in hierarchies, because now the other thing that chapter 1 is a bit of a meditation on what might constitute a hierarchy. One of my business colleagues, a former student of mine from Harvard, very, very smart guy. He's got a graduate degree in engineering from MIT and a PhD in psychology from Harvard, so there's like one of him in the whole world. And he's a very smart guy. And he helped me design the self-authoring suite, by the way, and he's been working for about 20 years on that. That's a suite of programs that helps people write about their lives and straighten them out. He told me to stop using the word dominance hierarchy. And he said the reason for that was that it was infested with Marxist presuppositions. And it really bothered me when he first said that, because I've been using the word for years, dominance hierarchy. He said, we had a discussion about that. He said, well, it's predicated on the idea that you climb up the hierarchy, human hierarchy, as a consequence of the expression of power. It's like, that's wrong. You climb up valid hierarchies as a consequence of the expression of competence. And that's actually technically right. He was exactly the right person to tell me that, because he had done his PhD on what predicts success in Western hierarchies. And the answer is quite clear. General cognitive ability, some prefrontal ability as well, which was what he specifically tested. So intelligence, roughly speaking, although it's a little bit more elaborate than intelligence, but that's close enough. And trait conscientiousness accounts for about 50% of the variance in long-term.
Right, so high intelligence and conscientiousness leads to success over long periods of time. Big surprise, guys, big surprise.
Success, and you think, well, hey, how do you want your society to be structured? It seems pretty good to me that smart, hard-working people are the ones most likely to succeed. That's not a bad empirical...
Right, exactly. That's, and, you know, public education and private education is predicated on giving to people who are the most smart and hardworking together the greatest success, right? More or less, right? There's some nepotism in there as well.
Test of the validity of a structure, you know, especially given how much vagary there is in life. Lots of random things happen to people, but it's better to be born 3 standard deviations above the mean in intelligence in the West than it is to be born 3 standard deviations above the mean in wealth in relationship to where you'll end up when you're 40. So he said to use the word competence hierarchy, or we decided that, and I think that's much better. So chapter 1 is a bit of a meditation on the nature of hierarchies and the biochemistry of hierarchy, but it's also an injunction about how to present yourself, because you want to present yourself to the world in a manner that doesn't disgrace you in some sense. That might be a good way to think about it. And you don't want to disgrace yourself, because the consequence of disgrace is emotional dysregulation, more pain, less positive emotion. And so the best way to present yourself is to stand up forthrightly and to stretch out, you know, and to occupy some space, and you make yourself sort of vulnerable by doing that, because you open up the front of your body, right? But it's a sign of confidence, and that way people are most likely to give you the benefit of the doubt. And that's a good way to start regulating your mood. But not only does it directly regulate your mood to stand up, because it's so tightly associated, like posture reflection is associated with serotonin and emotional regulation, but also because if you straighten up and you present yourself in that manner, then other people are more likely to take you seriously. And that means they'll start treating you as if you're a number 1 lobster instead of a number 10 lobster. And that's another way that you can at least give yourself the bloody benefit of the doubt, right?
Interesting. All right, let's end the video there. Hit the like, hit the sub, hit all the notifications, drop me a donation like Hunter M, Adrian R, Tom M, Bobby, and Dylan. Shoutouts to you, most recent purchaser of Strategist Guide to Seduction. And not only that, he also bought Quotes to Live By. Thank you. My books can be reached at bit.ly/heliosbooks. Of course, my Patreon, you can also go there, patreon.com/theheliosblog. And if you're interested in coaching, look no further than my email, which is theheliosblog@gmail.com. Just send me an email, I'll slot you right in. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening, especially if you listen to the end. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.